Evelyn Brooks here. November 1973. I'm holding a letter that should have burned decades ago, but somehow it found its way back to me. The handwriting is shaky, desperate. It belongs to a man named Samuel Crane. And what he confessed that winter night, well, you'll understand why some stories choose to stay buried. Samuel was a lighthouse keeper on Coldwater Point, Maine, 42 years old, never married. Barely spoke to anyone except the Coast Guard on his radio check-ins. People said he liked the isolation. They were wrong. Samuel didn't choose solitude. He was hiding from something that happened in 1952, something that carved itself so deep into his soul that 20 years later, he still couldn't sleep without the lights on. I met Samuel once, briefly, at a diner in Portland. He had these eyes, gray as winter ocean, that looked past you, through you, searching for something that wasn't there anymore. He ordered black coffee, didn't touch it, just wrapped his hands around the cup like he was trying to remember what warmth felt like. When I asked him about the lighthouse, he smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of a man who'd made peace with ghosts. But what you've heard so far is only the beginning. The letter arrived at my studio on a Tuesday morning. No return address. Just my name, written in letters that slanted like they were falling off the page. Inside, 17 pages of confession. Samuel wrote it the night before he disappeared. The Coast Guard found the lighthouse abandoned 3 days later. The light was still turning, the coffee pot still warm, his boots lined up neat by the door. But Samuel Crane was gone, vanished into the same fog he'd been watching for 21 years. Let me take you back to where it started. August 1952. Samuel wasn't a lighthouse keeper then. He was a commercial fisherman working the Grand Banks with a crew of 6 men aboard a vessel called the Catherine Marie. They were hunting cod, pulling nets in waters so deep you couldn't see the bottom, even on the clearest day. Samuel was the youngest deckhand, 21 years old, still believed the ocean gave more than it took. The crew had been out for 16 days when the weather turned. Not gradually. Suddenly, like someone flipped a switch. The wind came from the northeast, pushing waves 30 feet high. The captain, a man named Holloway with 40 years on the water, ordered everyone below deck. They'd ride it out, he said. They'd done it before. But then the net snagged on something. You have to understand, fishermen don't leave nets behind. That equipment costs money, and these were men who counted every dollar. The Catherine Marie lurched hard to starboard, held fast by whatever they'd caught. Holloway sent 2 men up to cut the lines. Samuel volunteered. He always volunteered. Thought it made him look brave. The deck was a sheet of ice and salt water. Samuel could barely stand. The other deckhand, a Portuguese man named Costa, pointed to the winch. The nets were wound so tight the metal was groaning. Samuel grabbed a knife and started sawing through the rope. That's when he saw it. Something in the net. Something big. At first, Samuel thought it was a whale. The nets had caught whales before. Usually they thrashed and broke free. But this wasn't moving, just hanging there, suspended in the web of rope and cork floats, swaying with the motion of the ship. Costa started shouting in Portuguese, words Samuel didn't understand but recognized anyway. Fear sounds the same in every language. The shape in the net was wrong. Too long, too angular. And when the lightning flashed, Samuel saw what made Costa scream. It was a submarine. Not American. Not any nationality Samuel recognized. The hull was smooth, black, without markings or numbers. No conning tower. No periscope. Just this long, dark cylinder caught in their nets like some prehistoric fish. And here's the part that made Samuel's hands shake when he wrote about it 20 years later. The submarine had windows. Not portholes. Windows. Like the kind you'd see in a house. And there were faces pressed against the glass. Wait, don't miss this detail. The faces were human. Or they looked human from a distance. Samuel could see their mouths moving, hands pressed against the windows. He counted 4 of them. Maybe 5. They were trying to say something, trying to get his attention. And the most horrifying part? They looked relieved to see him, like they'd been waiting for someone to find them. Costa was already cutting the nets. Holloway came up from below, saw the submarine, and his face went white. He grabbed Samuel by the collar and shouted one word, "Cut!" They sawed through every line, watching as the submarine slipped back into the water. It didn't sink fast. It descended slowly, deliberately, like it was being lowered by invisible hands. The faces stayed pressed against the windows, watching Samuel until the darkness swallowed them whole. Holloway made the crew swear they'd never speak of it. Not to the Coast Guard, not to their families, not to each other. He said there were things in the ocean that weren't meant to be found, and men who asked questions about those things had a way of disappearing. The Catherine Marie limped back to port with half their nets destroyed, and a story no one would ever tell. But Samuel couldn't forget the faces. He'd close his eyes and see them. Mouths forming words he couldn't hear, hands that pressed so hard against the glass he thought it might shatter. Were they prisoners? Were they dead? Were they even real? Or had the storm and exhaustion created something from nothing? 3 months later, Costa was found dead in his apartment. Heart attack, the coroner said. He was 34 years old, healthy as a horse. At the funeral, Holloway pulled Samuel aside and whispered, "Don't ask questions. Don't go looking. Just forget." Samuel tried. God knows he tried. He quit fishing, moved inland, worked construction in Vermont for 6 years, but the faces followed him. He'd see them in rain-streaked windows, in the reflections on lakes, in his dreams, where the submarine surfaced in shallow water, and the doors opened, and something that looked almost human climbed out and called his name. That's when Samuel applied to be a lighthouse keeper. Even now, he was still holding on. The application asked why he wanted the position. Samuel wrote that he loved the ocean, that he found peace in solitude. The truth was different. Samuel chose Coldwater Point because the lighthouse sat on rocks so shallow that nothing bigger than a fishing boat could approach. If the submarine ever came looking for him, it couldn't reach him there. The light would keep him safe. The tower would be his fortress. For 20 years, Samuel kept watch. Every night, he'd climb the spiral stairs to the lamp room and scan the water, looking for a smooth black shape, looking for windows where windows shouldn't be. He kept a journal, documenting every unusual sighting, strange lights beneath the waves, patches of water that moved against the current, nights when the fish disappeared and the ocean went silent as a grave. The Coast Guard thought he was eccentric. The townspeople thought he was crazy. But Samuel didn't care what they thought. He knew what he'd seen. He knew those faces were real. And deep down, in a place he didn't want to examine too closely, he wondered if they were still down there, still waiting, still watching. Then, November 1973 arrived. The letter Samuel sent me described what happened on November 12th. The weather was clear, unusually warm for Maine in autumn. Samuel was doing his routine maintenance, polishing the lens, checking the fuel, updating the log. Around sunset, he noticed something strange. The water near the rocks had changed color, not dramatically, just a shade darker, like a shadow passing underneath. Samuel grabbed his binoculars. At first, he saw nothing, just waves and seaweed and the occasional gull. Then the water bulged. Not a wave, a bulge, like something massive was rising from below. Samuel's hands started shaking so badly he almost dropped the binoculars. The submarine surfaced 20 yards from the lighthouse. It looked exactly as he remembered. Smooth black hull, no markings, and those windows, glowing with a soft yellow light. Samuel could see shapes moving inside. He wanted to run, wanted to hide, but his legs wouldn't move. He just stood there, watching as a hatch opened on top of the submarine. A man climbed out. He was wearing what looked like a diving suit, but made from material Samuel didn't recognize. Dark, flexible, almost organic. The man stood on the hull for a long moment, looking up at the lighthouse. Then he raised his hand. Not threatening, just waving, like he was greeting an old friend. Samuel waved back. He didn't know why. It just seemed like the thing to do. The man pulled something from his suit, a small object that caught the light. He held it up so Samuel could see, then placed it carefully on the rocks before climbing back into the submarine. The hatch sealed. The submarine submerged without a sound, leaving only ripples behind. Samuel waited until dark. Then he climbed down from the lighthouse, crossed the rocks, and found what the man had left. It was a photograph, old, faded, edges torn. The photo showed 6 men standing on the deck of a fishing boat. Samuel recognized the Catherine Marie, recognized the crew. And there, in the front, squinting against the sun, was 21-year-old Samuel Crane. Someone had drawn a circle around his face in red ink. That's when everything changed. Samuel spent that night writing the letter I'm holding now. 17 pages explaining everything. The nets, the submarine, the faces, the photograph. He wrote that he finally understood. The submarine hadn't been trapped in their nets by accident. It had been waiting there, waiting for someone to find it. And when Samuel looked through those windows, when he made eye contact with whatever was inside, something changed. Some connection formed. Some mark was made. They'd been watching him for 20 years, waiting for him to come to the lighthouse, waiting for him to be alone, isolated, unreachable. And now that they'd found him again, now that they'd left their calling card, Samuel knew what came next. He wrote, "I thought the lighthouse would protect me. I was wrong. The isolation didn't keep them away. It's exactly what they wanted. I'm alone here, Evelyn. No witnesses, no one to hear me scream. When you read this, I'll be gone. Maybe I'll be in that submarine, pressed against the windows like those other men. Maybe I'll be something worse. But please, Evelyn, please tell my story. Don't let them erase me completely." The letter ended with coordinates, numbers that corresponded to a spot in the ocean roughly 2 miles from Coldwater Point. Water depth, 2,400 feet. Samuel wrote that if anyone ever wanted to find answers, that's where they should look. That's where the submarine returns when it's not hunting. The Coast Guard searched for Samuel for 6 weeks. They found nothing. His personal belongings were untouched. His radio was set to the emergency frequency. The lighthouse log ended mid-sentence. November 12, 1973, 8:47 p.m. Water temperature 54 degrees. Visibility. That's it. Just visibility and then nothing. I kept Samuel's letter secret for months. I didn't know what to do with it. The story was too strange, too impossible. But it gnawed at me. Those coordinates haunted me. Finally, in March 1974, I hired a research vessel. I told them I was making a documentary about fishing grounds. I didn't mention submarines or photographs or lighthouse keepers who vanished into fog. We reached Samuel's coordinates on a gray morning. The ocean was calm, almost unnaturally smooth. The captain dropped a sonar buoy. We waited. For 3 hours, we saw nothing, just the regular topography of the seafloor. I was about to call it off when the sonar operator shouted. There was something down there. The sonar showed a massive object resting on the bottom, roughly 300 feet long, cylindrical, too geometric to be natural. The captain wanted to leave immediately. He said he'd spent 30 years on the water and knew when something was wrong. This was wrong. We could all feel it, but I convinced him to stay. Just 1 more hour. Just long enough to lower the underwater camera. The footage we captured changed everything I thought I knew about the world. The submarine was there. Real. Undeniable. Resting on the seafloor like a sleeping animal. The camera panned across its length, revealing details that made no sense. The hull wasn't metal. It looked organic, almost like bone or shell. The windows were dark now, but the camera caught something else. Something that made my blood freeze. There were other submarines, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, stretching across the seafloor in neat rows like a parking lot. Some were covered in sediment, ancient beyond measure. Others looked brand new. And in the distance, barely visible in the murky water, there were structures, buildings, a complex of some kind, built from the same bone-white material as the submarines. The camera lingered on one window, just for a moment, and in that moment, a face appeared, pressed against the glass, mouth open, eyes wide. It looked exactly like Samuel Crane. The captain cut the feed. He pulled up the camera so fast the cable snapped. We left the coordinates behind and never returned. The research vessel's logs were sealed. The footage was classified under maritime security protocols I didn't know existed. Men in suits visited my studio and politely, but firmly explained that some stories shouldn't be told, that there were things in the ocean that humanity wasn't ready to know about, that Samuel Crane was a troubled man who walked into the sea and drowned, and that was the end of it. But I kept the letter, and I kept Samuel's photograph, the one they left on the rocks. Sometimes, late at night, I take it out and study his face, that young fisherman, squinting in the sun, who had no idea what he'd found in those nets, what found him. I think about the other men in the photograph, the crew of the Catherine Marie. I looked them up, years later. Holloway died in 1968. Boat fire. Body never recovered. Costa you already know about. The other four? All dead before 1975. Heart attacks, accidents, drownings. One by one, they disappeared. Samuel was the last, and Samuel lasted the longest because he ran. He hid in that lighthouse, surrounded by rocks and light, thinking height and isolation would save him. But they were patient, 20 years patient. They waited until he was exactly where they wanted him. Then they came and collected what they'd marked. I wonder, sometimes, what happens to the men in those submarines? Are they conscious? Are they trapped or transformed? Or something else entirely? Samuel wrote that the faces looked relieved when they saw him, like they were waiting for rescue. But what if it wasn't rescue they wanted? What if they were trying to warn him? The most shocking part was yet to come. 2 weeks ago, I received another letter. No return address. The handwriting was identical to Samuel's, but the date was November 2023, 50 years after he disappeared. The letter contained only 3 sentences. I'm still here, Evelyn. We're all still here, and we're not alone anymore. Enclosed was a new photograph. Modern, color, high resolution. It showed Coldwater Point Lighthouse, taken from the water, and standing on the rocks, looking directly at the camera, was a figure in a dark suit, a man who shouldn't exist, a man who'd been missing for 5 decades, Samuel Crane. Not a day older than the night he vanished. I haven't slept well since. I keep thinking about those coordinates, about what's down there in the dark, about how many submarines might be resting on the seafloor, and how many faces might be pressed against those windows right now, watching the surface, waiting for the next person to look back. You won't believe what happened next. I traced the photograph's origin. It was taken last month, October 2023. Someone went to Coldwater Point and photographed the lighthouse from a boat. The angle matches exactly, taken from approximately where the submarine surfaced in 1973. And the timestamp on the digital file? 8:47 p.m. The exact moment Samuel's log ended 50 years ago. I contacted the current lighthouse keeper. An automated system now, no human operator needed. The light turns on sensors, maintained by quarterly visits from Coast Guard technicians. But when I asked about unusual activity, the technician mentioned something odd. Every November 12th, without fail, the sensors detect movement on the rocks, large movement, like something surfacing near the shore. The cameras capture nothing, just empty water. But the motion sensors never lie. Whatever took Samuel comes back every year, returns to the lighthouse like a ritual, like it's checking to see if he's still there, or maybe it's leaving something else, another message, another photograph, another invitation. I think about Samuel's words constantly. We're not alone anymore. What did he mean? That there are more submarines, more men caught in nets and marked and taken, or something worse, that whatever is inside those vessels, whatever turned those crews into faces pressed against glass, is spreading. The ocean covers 70% of our planet. We've explored less than 5% of it. We have better maps of Mars than we do of our own seafloor. And sometimes, late at night when I'm reading old letters and listening to the rain, I wonder what else is down there. What other things rest in the deep places, waiting with the patience of stone. Samuel Crane thought he could hide from what he saw. He was wrong. The lighthouse didn't protect him. It made him a beacon. It showed them exactly where he was. And when they were ready, when the time was right, they simply rose from the depths and took him home. I'm 63 years old now. I've spent my life collecting stories, but Samuel's is the one that won't let me go. Maybe because it isn't finished. Maybe because every November 12th, somewhere off the coast of Maine, something surfaces near an abandoned lighthouse and leaves proof that it was there. Or maybe it's because I keep having this dream. I'm standing on Coldwater Point, looking out at the ocean. The water is smooth as glass, and then I see them. Dozens of smooth black shapes rising from the depths. Hundreds, more than I can count. They surface without sound, surrounding the rocks, windows glowing with that soft yellow light. And in every window, pressed against the glass, is a face I recognize. People I've interviewed over the years, people whose stories I've told, all of them staring at me with those wide, desperate eyes, all of them mouthing the same silent words. Your turn. I wake up in the middle of the night, heart pounding, and tell myself it was just a dream. But then I remember Samuel's letter, his photograph, the coordinates that show something impossible resting on the ocean floor. And I wonder if the dream is a warning or a promise. The letter I received 2 weeks ago is sitting on my desk right now. I've read it so many times the paper is starting to wear thin. 3 sentences from a dead man. 3 sentences that suggest whatever happened to Samuel Crane in 1973 is still happening, still unfolding, still reaching up from the deep places toward the light. I could burn this letter. I could forget the coordinates, stop thinking about submarines and faces and men who vanish into fog. I could let Samuel's story end here, unfinished and unresolved. That would be the smart thing to do, the safe thing. But I won't, because somewhere in the Atlantic, 2,400 feet below the surface, there's a graveyard of impossible machines. And inside those machines are men who were marked, collected, and transformed into something we don't have words for. They're still conscious, still aware, still watching the surface through windows that should never exist. And Samuel Crane is with them now, has been for 50 years, not dead, not alive, just there, pressed against the glass, waiting for someone else to look back. This is Evelyn Brooks. It's November 2023, and if you ever find yourself on a fishing boat, pulling nets from deep water, and you catch something that doesn't belong there, something smooth and black with windows where windows shouldn't be, remember Samuel's story. Cut the nets. Let it sink back into darkness. And whatever you do, don't look at the faces. Because once they see you, once that connection is made, the mark is permanent. They'll know where to find you. And they'll wait as long as it takes. 20 years, 50 years, forever. The deep places have all the time in the world. And eventually, everyone goes to the water.